Hi, this is Dr. Daniel J. Waters, the author of A Heart Surgeon's Little Instruction Book, and this is the Unfreaking Believable Podcast.
Welcome to another episode of Unfreaking Believable. We invite you to pull up a chair, relax, and join in for the next 40 minutes or so as we bring you guests who will share with you the moments that have made a difference in their lives. And it's all because of that one inciting incident. We believe that life is infinitely stranger than fiction, stranger than anything the mind can invent. You might even say it's unfreaking believable. Welcome to the podcast. We're your hosts, and I'm Jenny.
I'm Jen.
I'm Betsy. Ladies, nice to be together again. Looks like we've got a trend going. Second night in a row we've been recording.
Yeah, it's so much fun.
And we've got at least 3 other guests lined up and ready to go. So we're going to be seeing a lot of each other, I think, in the next week.
Yeah, we are rocking and rolling.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Everybody doing okay today?
Yep, just still busy packing, getting on with prepping for my move at the end of the month.
I was feeling you today. I was transferring stuff from one storage unit to another today and thinking about, because we're trying to get rid of one of our storage units. So I was thinking about all the boxes you're probably moving right now.
Yeah.
And so hopefully that is going well for you. I know you're super excited to be living that nomadic life. So yay.
Can't wait. How about you, Betsy? How you weathering those storms?
You know what? We had power outage today. Lots of heavy rain. It has rained, I'm not kidding, almost 24 hours solid. I don't think it stopped in 24 hours.
Wow.
And we're supposed to have more rain and more chances of storms tomorrow. There are tornadoes all around us, but none of them are anywhere near us. Praise the Lord.
Yeah.
I'm glad for that.
Amen to that.
Yes.
You've had quite enough of those, I think.
Well, I left Oklahoma thinking I'm going to get away from some of these, but, the tornado belt is moving. It's further east now. So I checked in on some of our friends up in Indiana and made sure that they were okay. They had some storm damage up there and lots of rain and flooding, but everybody's okay. So, yeah, I'm done. I'm ready I want to see summer again.
Yeah, I'm with you there. We had sleet and freezing rain last night that piled up on my porch.
Yikes. Yeah, it's cold here today too, so not fun.
Yeah.
All right, Jen, you got a word of the day for us?
Yes, in my 93-degree misery
Ugh.
down in Florida, 93 and humid. But yes, I have a wonderful word for the day. And we were all talking about retirement earlier. So this word, I think, kind of fits in with the whole retirement theme. And the word is eremitivism.
Eremitivism.
Okay. What does that mean?
Eremitivism is the act of gradually fading out of the lives of others, not so much for vengeance or for any negativity, but just out of a desire for solitude or renewal.
Ooh, that might need to be my word of the year.
Yeah.
It's a good word. It's a very good word.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
think it's a very kind of a good resetting word, when it's talking about like kind of just finding your peace and cutting out the things that don't enhance that peace.
Yeah.
Things that no longer serve me.
There you go. There you go. Jenny,
Yep.
fun facts?
I do. Got 3 quick fun facts for us today. The first one, artist Pablo Picasso died in 1973, which was the same year Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon was released.
It's interesting because I don't remember when he died because I only would have been like 2.5 to 3 years old.
Yeah.
But I remember his death being recent because my mother was a really big art fan. And I remember she had all these art books, and I remember us talking about the fact that he had only recently passed away and that I had actually been on the planet at the same time as Pablo Picasso. And I thought that was pretty cool when I was a kid. So
yeah, because a lot of people think he died, back during the Renaissance. And it's like, no, he was much more recent.
He's a modern artist.
yes, indeed. Yes,
All
indeed.
right. Here we go. The Brooklyn Bridge was being built during the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876.
Okay, that
That
no, I'm
one
not.
boggles the mind.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Be
Well,
nope.
I got one more that's going to blow your minds even more. Here we go. The fax machine was invented the same year the first wagon crossed the Oregon Trail in 1843.
No way.
Yep.
Somebody
Yep.
explain this to me.
Yeah.
So the concept was from a Scottish inventor, Alexander Bain, from 1843. It was the electric printing telegraph, and it was considered the earliest form of fax technology. And Bain's device would use a pendulum system to scan messages line by line and transmit them over telegraph wires. And how it worked is a metal stylus moved across a sheet of metal, detecting dark and light areas similar to modern fax scanning. The electrical signal was then transmitted to a receiver, which reproduced the message onto chemically treated paper using electrochemical reactions.
Is everybody ready to get started?
Let's do it.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay, on this episode, it's one of my picks, so I get to introduce our guest. And today is Dr. Daniel J. Waters, an author and physician with a rich background in both medicine and literature. Throughout his medical career, Dr. Waters practiced open heart surgery for 3 decades. His passion for writing led him to publish various forms of creative work, including short stories, essays, medical satire, and poetry. Dr. Waters is the author of A Heart Surgeon's Little Instruction Book, a collection of surgical wisdom that have influenced medical professionals and are still referenced to this day. Transitioning into fiction, he penned the novel Threshold, drawing on his medical experience to craft compelling narratives. In recognition of his literary achievements, Dr. Waters received the 2020 Nancy Pearl Award for Best Book from the Pacific Northwest Writers Association. Dr. Dan Waters, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here.
We're excited to have you.
We're thrilled. And I must tell you that I am super excited to, see that book that you wrote about the little instruction book, because I now know what anybody I know who might be graduating from medical school is going to get as a gift. That sounds perfect.
It's surprising. It stood the test of time. It's pushing 30 years old here, and most of the stuff that's in there they tell me is still true. So I would have not seen that coming in 1995 when we published it. So
yeah, that's impressive because things change. Technology and everything changes so much, but there are very specific things. I was quite impressed when I read that they're still referenced today.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is because so much of what's in there is not science so much. I mean, there are little clinical pearls and little tidbits and stuff, but so much of it is about how to be a heart surgeon, how to be a doctor, how to be a regular human being, as opposed to put a stitch here or, do this or do that. You had to put that in there. I did. I mean, a lot of those things were important, but out of the 400 and some things that are in there, I'm going to tell you 300 of them are non-clinical. So maybe that's why it holds up so well.
Well, wisdom is wisdom, right?
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about medical satire. That word pairing is very interesting to me.
Oh gosh. For a long time, there was just a hilarious website called Gomer Blog. And it was nothing but medical satire. And it just made fun of, really what it made fun of was physicians laughing at ourselves. For primarily orthopedists for some reason, they seem to take the worst of it, but also just kind of it was just constantly shots at the medical industrial complex, I think, and where medicine is today. And it's just too bad there's not more of it. Laughter and humor may not be the best medicine, but I don't think you can practice medicine without it. And it was something that was aimed at physicians, although anybody with any little run up against the medical world would probably have found it extremely funny.
Yeah, there's definitely I think a very popular strain of that in YouTube content creation and reels and things like that. There's a comedian that does exclusively medical humor. He was an ER nurse, I think, and so
Oh, Dr.
all of his
Glockenflicken. Yeah, if there's one, they are just. I watch every one of them because they're just absolutely hilarious, and they're just spot on.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm not even in the medical profession, and I find myself just watching video after video, just laughing because even though I mean, I'm not a physician or anything, but I have been a patient and I have been in the ER, so I definitely can relate.
Yeah.
Daniel, it looks like you also have several thriller novels. You want to tell us a little bit about those? Is it a series?
Yeah, I wrote The Threshold was one of my early books, and that I put a lot of medicine in that. The heroine in that book is a surgical fellow, a trainee at a fictional hospital. So gave me a chance to, write long form and to, write about something I knew without, writing about like a character based on myself, which is, I think, the ultimate narcissistic thing an author can do. Um, but the other books are all in a series, and I grew up in southern New Jersey. I was down at the Jersey Shore, which is very different from the one you saw on MTV. Um, but throughout most of my youth, and I to this day, I just love the shore. And so I thought, what a great place to set narratives, kind of sleepy little beach towns, what could happen? And the answer is a lot because it's 35 minutes from Philadelphia on a good day. And so all the things that go on in a big city wander over the one little bridge and end up on this barrier island. And again, my main character was a heroine. And the books are set in what those of a certain age would say was the golden age at the Jersey Shore, which was the 1960s and the 1970s. So it gave me just a chance to kind of relive my misspent youth and to put it in book form.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your writing process and how your books came to be?
I wrote an awful lot for years and years. All I wrote was short form essays and short stories, and I really really enjoyed. I still enjoy that form. And then I just thought, well, a novel is kind of a series of connected short stories, and so let me see if I can do that. And I kind of came up with a concept and, kind of a good heroine. Women are so much more interesting just in general than men are, that I don't know why every book is not about a major woman character, because there's just so much more leeway there. You just so many more things to make the character real. And I thought, well, nobody ever writes about the Jersey Shore. And, with the vivid memories that I had, and then when I sat down to write it, the first novel I wrote is still in a drawer somewhere, and it was not very good. But as I think a former guest, Bob Degoni, who's been kind of a mentor for me, told me one time, he said, well, sometimes you have to write a novel to learn how to write a novel. And so I made a lot of mistakes in that one, which is why it's never seen the light of day. But I started to learn there's an actual process and a craft and some basic rules you have to follow. But I hate to use the word process because I realized early on it is so different for everyone. Some people are, they're just very methodical. They outline it. They have post-it notes. They have butcher paper. They have easels, and they can tell you what's going to happen the first day in chapter 62. I kind of sit down
I
and
feel called out.
yeah, and that's fine. But I mean, it's just what works for you. I was always been a visual learner and a visual thinker, so I kind of sit down and, um, uh, you know, write what I see happening in my head. I mean, it's almost like I'm watching it happen, then I just write it down. But I write like I'm reading, so I'll stop and I'll say, all right, if I were reading this, what would I not expect? What would be really cool to happen next? And what will the reader not see coming? And a lot of times it works. I mean, it works more often than it doesn't, but that's why God invented revision. So
You're a little bit like Betsy, where you just kind of watch what your characters do and then write an incident report.
Yeah, Edna St. Vincent Millay used to say it, "When I'm writing, I'm taking transcription from God." And I thought, well,
Mhm.
that's a little self-important. I don't think it's quite like that. But, but I almost feel like, I'm watching some movie that's playing in my head and I'm just kind of writing down the action and what the characters are saying and what they're doing. And like I said, I'm a right brainer. I'm a visual thinker. And so that's worked well for me. I tried the other way of outlining it, and what I found is that it for me it never ends up where you think it's going to go. Every book I've written has ended differently than I thought it was because the characters in the story, as silly as it sounds, I mean they do take on a life of their own, and sometimes you just got to go with them. I mean,
And they don't always do what you tell them to.
yeah, I mean, it's funny. I mean, you're writing them. You can make them do anything you want, but every once in a while, you have to, without going like crazy, you have to inhabit the character just a little bit to make them seem real. And so sometimes you start to realize that things you had them doing or were going to have them do are not what that character would do. And so you learn about the character as you go along. You a little bit your voice develops along with theirs. So it's very interesting. Very
I love
interesting.
those
So
aha moments that come where all of a sudden, they start doing their thing and you realize it's so much better than the idea that you had going. And it just it's like a light bulb comes on because they're running with a better story than what you had planned to start with.
yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think if you are slave to an outline or a story arc that you had come up with at the very beginning, that you're limited by that. I think the books have turned out better because I was willing to say, yeah, I think the side road is actually more interesting than this, interstate I've been on. So let's go there. And so far, so good. I mean, Netflix hasn't called yet, but it's early yet. So
It's just a matter of time. Our standing rule in our family
yeah,
is
just a matter of time.
if we get lost, it's okay because that means we know we had an adventure. We didn't just stick to the road most traveled. So yay, I like that.
Yeah.
Um, so are you still working?
No, I retired in 6 years ago. But I was going to say about being lost, I mean, one of the few things my children have remembered of wisdom I imparted was, lost is one thing, but 99% of the time, you're not really lost. You're just not exactly sure where you are. And I think what happens is people say, "Oh my God, I'm lost," and then they panic, and it's like, well, I'm not really lost. It's just like, let me just kind of go over here and see if I can find
Taking the
something I
scenic
know.
route.
So, yeah, no, I retired in 2019, and I had done cardiac surgery for 30 years, and that's a long time in that business for a private practitioner. I think I think certainly you can go longer if you're in a university where you can diversify a little bit. But if you're every minute of every day is operating, taking care of post-operative problems and being on call, 30 years is a lifetime and a half.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
So what does your writing day look like? How do you balance your interest with everything else?
I mean, I started writing, really in high school. And so, I mean, I've been a writer longer than I've been, a doc. And all the years I was practicing, I was always writing something, even in med school. And I always said, I wrote in the spaces between the cases. So even when I was writing my first novel, if I had 40 minutes or 50 minutes of downtime between cases while they were turning the room over, doing whatever they needed to do, I could sit down and I could tap out a chapter or a short story or continue working something I was on. And so it was really nice to be able to kind of switch back and forth, and I think it was healthy too. I found that writing um, is a great way to process a lot of the emotional burden I think that comes with any medical specialty, but especially when you're in kind of a high stress one, it's really a nice out.
I'm really impressed by that because I don't know that I could change channels that quickly. If I have, only 45 minutes, I mean, it takes me 15 minutes just to get my head right. And then I can write for a couple hours or whatever, but I admire that, being able to just literally take the remote and switch from, oh, I just, did an angioplasty to, let me write a chapter about this cop over
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. Well, I think in a business like ours, you have to be an inveterate multitasker, and so you are constantly shifting between doing something and solving another problem that might be, going on while you're in the operating room. And so, I mean, in cardiac surgery, if you can't multitask, I don't think you could really be successful. So part of it may come from that.
All right, Dan, I'm sure our listeners are eager to know why we have brought you on the show, and that is for you to tell us your unfreaking believable story. So the microphone is all yours.
Oh, well, thank you. I think almost any physician that you talk to will have, a story that, they just still shake their head at. It depends on what you're in, but I don't ever want to say, well, I had a more amazing story than anybody else, but I did have a unique experience, and I think it's to this day one that probably I would never see again if I was still in practice for another 20 years. And it still amazes me to this day the number of things that had to happen when they happened in the order that they happened to be, as you guys would say, unfreaking believable. So years ago, several decades now, when I was a much younger physician, um, we live here in Iowa, in the northern part of the state. There are a number of glacial lakes, and so they're much used in the wintertime. A lot of ice fishermen, a lot of snowmobilers, and that Iowa, Minnesota is just a thing people do. Well, this was late in the winter, pushing early spring, and the ice was starting to open up a little bit. To help the fish population in a lot of these small lakes, they put things called aerators in. They actually keep an area of open water. And that allows the oxygen content in the lake to do better, so that come real springtime, that the fish population that survives. And snowmobilers are out there, and occasionally, if you get a snowmobile going fast enough, you can actually ride it across a small patch of open water. Kind of a little Evel Knievel stunt, But and so that was not something that was unheard of. So three snowmobilers are out one winter night doing what snowmobilers usually do, and a ground blizzard whips up, and there's a whiteout. And so all of a sudden they're out, and even though it's not a huge lake, they sort of lose track of each other, and they lose track of where they are. And one of them, his snowmobile doesn't jump the water and sinks in the lake underneath him. He goes to a piece of the ice that's intact, and without anything to dig into it, like screwdrivers or tongs or anything, he cannot pull himself up. And so the water, because it's not tap water, will actually, it'll only be about 30, 31 degrees. So it can actually get below the actual freezing point because it's of what's in it. And so there he is in 30, 31 degree water, unable to get out. And hypothermia, because he's totally immersed, hypothermia is very rapid. And so he, and this is all, of course, we're putting this together, what happened in retrospect, but so he's unable to get himself out, and basically, passes out, becomes unconscious from hypothermia, and almost sinks below the water. And his two partners who were out snowmobiling with him, they don't know where he is, and so they do the right thing. They find their way to shore. They call the rest, what be the EMTs, the first responders, and they come out on the lake, and they pointing to where they think he might be, and they put a survival suit on one of them, and he actually gets in the water. They put a rubber raft out, and miraculously, on a like without a moon, on a dark lake in the middle of the night, they find him. And how they find him is unfreaking believable, because the only thing that was above the water was the top of his black helmet. And whether there was air trapped in it or it was the foam or whatever. So they take him out of the water, and, he's in full cardiac arrest, freezing cold. And the other things that happened are, within 10 days prior to this, the local first responders, the fire department, the paramedics had actually practiced a cold water rescue. They only do one, and they had just done it. The ER department had just done an in-service in the local hospital where I worked. They just had an in-service on a portable heart-lung machine that my two perfusionists, the fellows that run the heart-lung machine during heart surgery, that they had rigged up for us. And we're talking about how it could be used in different situations, and hypothermia was one of them. And so the ER doc who was on that night happened to be the one who attended that in-service. And she had the presence of mind to call me. It's 11:30, pushing midnight, and I'm asleep. I'm in bed, having to work the next day. And she gives me the situation, and she says, what do you think? And I said, well, I said, what are they doing? And they said, well, they're doing CPR. They've got a breathing tube down. He's in the back of the ambulance, and they're on their way. And I'm thinking, okay. So I get up, throw my sweatshirt on, which turned out to be a lifeguard sweatshirt from New Jersey. Don't ask me if that was part of the plan. Drive to the hospital, and I actually got there a couple minutes before they brought the gentleman in. He's only 30 some years old. And all of a sudden you have to make this decision, and the up and down of it is, it might work. It might work partially, meaning you might be able to get circulation back. But if it doesn't work all the way, then you're left with, somebody relatively young who may never wake up. And so it was, luckily I had to make it in a really very short period of time, because it was a very difficult decision to make. But, 31 years old, relatively thin. I thought, hypothermia is deadly, but it's also protective. And so my thought process at the time was, if anyone could survive this is the scenario where that could happen. So we did not think we had time to go up to the operating room, because once you're inside the hospital, things are warming up relatively quickly. So we made a little incision down in the groin, and we put the tubes to the heart-lung machine in, and started pumping, having literally no idea what was going to happen. And I can, 30 years later almost, I can see it. I can remember it as if people say this all the time, but it might as well have been yesterday, because it was that memorable, in terms of, for some reason, it's just crystal clear to me. I looked around at everybody, and they're looking at me, and we're kind of like, okay, now what? And so we ran the heart-lung machine for a little bit. You have to bring the temperature up very slowly. And all of a sudden, the chest gave a heave, and a disorganized rhythm came back. And we thought, well, okay, we got this far. So, just like on TV, we got the defibrillator out and shocked the heart. And again, you see it 100 times on TV. A rhythm came back, just perfect rhythm like you'd have today. And I really just kind of stood there for a minute thinking, wow, that's cool. And the work wasn't really over at that point. I had to deal with the lung problems from swallowing water and being immersed and all the other things. But as it turned out, we had him on the heart-lung machine, took him, dragged the whole apparatus with the gentleman attached up to the intensive care unit. And, 2, 3 of us docs involved just kind of sat there thinking, we're someplace we've never been before. And so we weren't really sure. But, eventually, his heart came back and the respirator was breathing for him. And so we took the tubes from the heart lung machine out. And then I think was the worst part, because we had to wait another day or so to see what was going to happen. And I think nobody was more relieved, perhaps other than his family, when he woke up than I was. And I think it was maybe 6 or 7 days later he left the hospital. And
Wow.
It's not certainly the first time it had ever been done that somebody had been resuscitated. I think, for what it's worth, I think he, perhaps to this day, is the person who had been, as far as we know, clinically what we call asystolic, without a heartbeat, for the longest period of time. I mean, could have been up to 2 hours. So,
Wow.
he would have met, when he came out of the lake, he would have met all of the criteria basically for clinical death. So, it was, you got to remember, this is before the internet, and it's not going around. And so, here we are, this little hospital in Iowa, and, I always say it's good to be good, it's better to be lucky. But there was a lot of luck, a lot of stars that had to align perfectly for all of that to happen. And luckily for him, I mean, it did. He made basically a full recovery, has lived a full life as far as I know. He'd be in his 60s, today. And I don't know. I mean, I didn't do anything heroic. I didn't do anything that I hadn't been trained to do. But I think what's unfreaking believable is how many little things lined up. And somebody asked me, they said, well, what are the chances? I said, well, I would guess it's like driving through Midtown Manhattan at rush hour and making every green light. I mean, that's sort of I think the chances that you could repeat that sequence of events. So yeah, I'll never forget it. I mean, you have to be a little bit careful. Patients' stories are their own. You don't want to co-opt them. You don't. It's their experience, and so you try and respect their privacy and what they want to talk about. But I mean, it's surprising. It got media attention for 20 years after that. I ended up going to, I don't know, somebody found the story, and I end up on 2020 and the National Geographic Channel. Just because it was still, and I would say today, it's still very, very dramatic. Now, that field of medicine has progressed, and actually now when people have cardiac arrests, they cool them. They put them on a thing that take the blood and they cool the blood, and that has allowed a number of people to survive neurologically intact. But this was really way back before. It was almost, now it's almost its own branch of medical care. Where back then it was just a few heart surgeons, a little bit flying by the seat of our pants. Like I said, we didn't have the computer. We couldn't read articles. There weren't discussion forums. I knew about it because I'd read an article about it in, a printed medical journal, that comes out once a month. But just all of those little things that I would know what to do, that the ER would think of it, that the guys on the rescue squad could find him. I mean, you're wearing a black helmet, a black snowmobile suit. The water's
during a
black.
whiteout.
Yeah. And you got a guy in the water in a survival suit trying to look for him. You got two guys in a raft, and they have the presence of mind. They pull him out of the water, they resuscitate him, and they get him to the hospital. And then so I said, if there's ever anything that the unsung heroes of this story are the rescue squad guys to this day, and my two perfusionists, my heart lung machine guys, who really built a portable heart lung machine. I don't want to say from scratch, from components we use for the big heart lung machine, but not only built it for use, but had it ready to go and actually in-serviced the ER, literally days before this happened. So you really do have to ask yourself, what are the chances of all of those things happening within literally the same time period? I'd say the
They're becoming
chances
great.
are,
God, no why. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So again, I every time I tell this story, and I don't tell it as much anymore, you try not to be, kind of me, and I did this and I did that, because that, I had trained at a world famous institution, and they taught me everything that I knew, and part of it, when you train at a place like that, is you come out a little bit with the confidence to do what they taught you, and I think that played into it. But there were people thought I had done the wrong thing right from the get-go, and I didn't know if I'd done the right thing or not. So it's nice that it worked out, but had it gone the other way, I'm sure they would not have been quite as kind to me as they were. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I have two kind of thoughts that came out of that. The first is, Betsy is the queen of safety trainings and disaster trainings and all that kind of stuff. So I could just see her little heart um pitter pattering when you were
Yeah.
talking about how they had just been in service on exactly these scenarios. So I definitely, I think that goes to, you never know what you're going to need to do until the moment when you need to do it. And so that's why all those kinds of trainings that people do are so important.
Yeah. And you never want to do them.
And
Yeah.
cold water rescue training is difficult, ladies, because 11 years as a firefighter EMT, I've been in that Gumby suit many times.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, I'll bet. But, again, this is the kind of situation that shows why it's so important. And then my second thought sort of about it, when you were talking about how now the procedures involve cooling the body and all of that, it made me wonder if perhaps this particular instance was part of the research that led to, I mean, I'm sure they knew that cold would slow things down anyway, of course, but it makes me wonder if maybe that wasn't something that was cited in the research that moved them toward that as sort of a practice that is the standard practice for that kind of thing. Do you think that might be?
I do. I mean, and I don't want to say that we were groundbreaking or, we changed the way care was delivered, but I think, anytime you do something that extends the limit or pushes the envelope, I think it shows you. I mean, he'd been down for so long, and came back. So I think what that said to a lot of people was, maybe maybe we're missing something. Maybe we're, thinking of hypothermia only as something that damages you, rather is that something that can save you, or save your brain or save your heart, or, I mean, and it took a while, for that to come along, but I think it was, we published paper on it. And again, here we are, a little town in Iowa publishing in a big surgical journal. And, but I think it got a lot of interest because it was like, okay, we had no idea you could go without a heartbeat for this long and survive. And so again, it's, I don't want to say it's a record or, a Guinness, that cheapens it. That's not it. But it shows you maybe that the limit is maybe further out than you think it might be. So, somebody that's in for 20 minutes, when they're hypothermic and they're arrested, I think it probably gave a number of other practitioners reason to say, well, this other guy was down for that long, let's give it a shot. And so,
Yeah.
were lives saved? I think so. I think it advanced that little tiny side road of what we would call mechanical circulatory support and resuscitation. So, yeah,
Sure.
I mean, I always feel like we added something to medical knowledge, even if it was by the seat of our pants.
You could never do an experiment like that. It had to be something that just sort of happened as an incident, and then you were able to kind of reflect on it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think philosophically, I had a Jesuit undergraduate education, so I always kind of think philosophically, and I'm a great fan of the Jesuit education because it teaches you to think about things in different ways, and you know, it, it's such an interesting thing because had it gone south, had we ended up with a bad result, we just as easily could have set resuscitation science back 10 years. And people say, see, this is why you don't do this. And I'm not saying that
Yeah.
that would have been wrong. Again, doing the technical part of it was, I knew how to do that. I mean, like I really, that was not the hardest part. The hardest 5 minutes for me was standing there deciding whether, we were going to make this decision or not. And the guiding principle for me was if I was 31 years old and this was the circumstance, what would I want someone to do? And I would say I'd want them to do everything. If there was
Sure, yeah,
a
err on the
small
side of
chance.
life. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, I mean, people talk about a lot, I never tried never to be one of those physicians who, it's like, could not recognize futility. You never want to keep I mean, we have technology, you can keep people alive for a lot of times when they have no hope of recovery. But this was, I thought there was enough of a glimmer I mean, like I said, it's so indelible in my mind. You're taking me back just by talking about it. But there was enough of a glimmer to say, I think it's worth it. And like I said, right from the outset, there were naysayers. Like, I can't believe he did this. I mean, didn't say it to me. Most heart surgeons have what might be kindly described as, a strong personality. And so they didn't exactly say it to my face, but that was on the wire, can you believe he did this? And, this is going to be terrible. And, this and this and that. And so, I can, and I understood that could happen. And so that, for a couple of days, that was a heavy backpack to carry around for a while, but, you know, it worked. I'm glad it worked. Like I said, you'd need almost exactly the same circumstances, to duplicate it, and the chances of that, as you can imagine, like most unusual things, would be difficult to repeat.
Yeah, like you said, the stars had aligned that night, and everything just fell into place for this man to live. This man had a purpose in life. He was saved for a reason.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like you said, if his story and his survival in good shape, gave other researchers, other physicians that did what I did, faced with a similar thing, to say, well, we know this will work. We know it can work. Maybe it's worth a shot. So, yeah, I mean, if anything, if we made a contribution to medical science, I think it was just extending the envelope of what's possible a little bit. And as we used to say every time we finished an open heart operation, not bad for a little town in Iowa.
Not bad at all, because that is one unfreaking believable story.
Absolutely.
Hey, Dan, you want to share with our listeners where they can find your books?
Yeah, I have a website. You can find them on Amazon under my name. I have a website which will also take you there, and it's www.bandagemanpress.com. It's my little publishing company.
I love that.
I love that.
Named it.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little nod to my mother, who I'm sure in her way, she's still alive, so at 95. But when I was little, there was a little golden book called Dr. Dan the Bandage Man. And I believe she read that to me more than once, let's just say. And so and it's not really a role model. Dr. Dan was, kind of a dork. He wore white socks with, brown dress shoes and put Band-Aids on everything, including the dog. So it was not exactly Joe. I wanted to be Joe Gannon, not Dr. Dan, the Bandage Man,
Well, she
So,
spoke it
but
into
anyway,
being.
so I just, but I'd been Dr. Ever since I'm in medical school, I was Dr. Dan, just Dr. It's just because it's alliteration and it works really well. And so I decided if I made this little publishing company, I would just call it Bandage Man Press. And if you look up bandagemanpress.com, you'll find me. And I have eight novels that you can find on Amazon. I have the 2 instruction books. I wrote a heart surgeon's little instruction book, and the publishing company liked that so much, we did one that kind of was broader, just called a surgeon's little instruction book. Although I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but a heart surgeon's little instruction book is out of print. And there was a copy on eBay for $900, but I was
That was
I was
unbelievable.
just thought, okay, it might, I guess it's a collector's item, but I wouldn't pay $900 for it. If you look really
Right.
hard, there are digital versions of it somewhere. Just keep digging in Google under a heart surgeon's little instruction book, and you'll find it. And like I said, to have people quoting me 30 years later, if that's not a little bit of immortality, I don't know what it is.
That is fantastic. Dan, I want to thank you so much for sharing your story and explaining what makes you so unfreaking believable. And I'd also like to thank my 2 besties. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on whatever platform you listen on. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, and Audible.
You can join our Unfreaking Believable Facebook group and follow us on TikTok, Instagram, X, and you can also join us on Patreon for exclusive content and other perks.
You can visit our website at www.ufbpodcast.com. And if you have an unfreaking believable story, reach out to us at ufbpodcast@gmail.com because we'd like to hear your story too.
Betsy, how about you send us out with your textbook quote of the day?
All right. So my textbook quote of the day today comes from Helen Schuckman in her book, A Course in Miracles. And she says, miracles are merely the translation of denial into truth.
Nice.
I like that.
All right. Thank you, listeners. And remember, as you go out into the world this week, don't just be awesome.
Be unfreaking believable.
See you all next time.